Humanism and rationality are the two key words for the Renaissance. Humanism, again, belief in the worth of humans and their ability to achieve. It also carries over into ideas of competition and the contest, for example, for the design of the dome of Florence Cathedral. It was also humanism, the belief in particular of his own abilities, that allowed Brunelleschi to take what he saw and interpret it. There is a new confidence in our own abilities to invent, to achieve, that is a part of the Renaissance and is humanism. In addition to the humanism, there's also rationality, and that brings the science to creative processes, and in particular, that would include perspective. It also brings mathematics, which is also, I think, a component of perspective. Another example of that is dissections. Our artists now, instead of just drawing a figure by looking at the figure of a human being, will actually hope to understand the nature of the human body, and they'll do that through scientific investigation, achieved through dissection. One of the early artists to do this is an artist whose name is Paiuolo, and this is his Hercules and Antaeus. The figures here are fairly convincing. They're caught in motion. In fact, they're caught in violent action. It is successful because Paiuolo did dissections and came to understand the way in which the human body actually functioned. This is also important because this is a classical myth. So our artists are returning to the ancients for subject matter. Antaeus is a giant, the son of Mother Earth. Hercules is a hero. He has a number of tasks to undertake, and one of them is to destroy Antaeus. The problem that Hercules encountered with Antaeus is every time he picked him up and thought he had killed him, he would release him again back to the earth, but because Antaeus was the son of Mother Earth, he would regain his strength. Hercules finally works out he has to hold the figure of Antaeus up in the air long enough to actually suffocate him, to strangle him to death. So what we're seeing here is this kind of elemental physical contest between these two beings, where Hercules is pressing all of the life out of Antaeus. It is a death grip, and it takes place in an instant in time as Antaeus presses with all of his might down on the head of Hercules, while Antaeus is experiencing terrible pain. All of this is brought to you, made possible, because of the dissections and the understanding of the human form that our sculptor acquired. This is a grouping also that moves in space, something that is pretty daring. It's not going to be picked up on a larger scale until we get to the 17th century with the sculptor Bernini. We've already looked at Bernini briefly. This piece, which is bronze, is only 18 inches tall. Nevertheless, it reveals this new rationality, the scientific investigation of learning about the human form through dissection. And of course, later in the Italian High Renaissance, both Leonardo and Michelangelo are going to undertake dissections as well, perhaps for slightly different reasons. Leonardo out of scientific interest, and Michelangelo out of a desire to create sculpture that is increasingly lifelike and convincing. This is a detail on the left of the struggle between Hercules and Antaeus that was crafted by Paiuolo. He is also the artist who is responsible for adding the two small children, Romulus and Remus, to the image of the she-wolf, and they're located right down here. I've put our Capitoline wolf, or our she-wolf, back into this section of the course. There is a question about this, if this is an Etruscan piece or if in fact it was made in Italy, probably around the 12th century. The new thinking is leaning in the direction of Italian 12th century, so late medieval, maybe Gothic or beginning of the Gothic period. And the reason for that is the casting method that was used. This was cast using a single mold, and that's not the technology that was used in the ancient world by the Greeks, the Romans, or the Etruscans for that matter. So the new thinking is that this may, in fact, be medieval. This is a closer look at the Capitoline wolf, and you can make up your own mind if you think it's Etruscan or coming from the Middle Ages. I guess I'd like you to be putting it in the context of what we've just seen coming out of the Romanesque and the Gothic period in terms of sculpture and the love of surface pattern. Our wolf is an amazing creation, but I'm not going to say it's an entirely naturalistic one because it is so heavily tied to pattern on its surface, and it's a bit stylized, even though it's an amazing, I'm going to call it an animal portrait, an amazing animal portrait. What I would like to point out, and let's for a minute make the argument that it does come from the Middle Ages, because of the pattern, and I'd like you to think of some of the Romanesque pieces that we saw, which were so in love with pattern, but the love of pattern and the simplification and the abstraction that is part of the Middle Ages. You can see that in the ruff around the neck of our wolf. You can also see it in the repeated line of the ribs and in this pattern that runs down the back of our creature and also a little bit down the side of our creature. I'd like you to see how strongly that contrasts with the two children that were created in the period of the Renaissance by Puyuolo. They move in space. They have a very convincing three-dimensional body, and they have a softness to them that is fleshy and convincing. This is a fairly good sample of the way in which the Renaissance, through its rational approach to learning about human anatomy and embracing perspective and good science and empiricism, is capable of returning to ideas of naturalism in works of art and capturing the nuances of the human body as it exists in space in our real world. And another view, our children looking rounded, our wolf looking a little bit more linear, intended to be seen from a particular point of view. And if you look at the head, you're going to see a little bit more of the pattern that seems to frame the face of Mama Wolf. Still an amazing work of art and a dramatic portrait of a mother animal protecting its offspring with its eyes kind of arched and its ears up, waiting to hear a sound of someone that might be out there to harm the children that she is protecting. You can almost imagine that the animal is panting because of the intensity of its desire to care for and to protect the children and the anxiety that comes from having that burden. So an incredible creation, but nevertheless probably one that belongs to the Middle Ages because of its abstract surface pattern, the fact that it's not totally a naturalistic depiction other than the character study of the animal. And when we compare it to works from the Renaissance in particular, we can see that it doesn't have the full understanding of anatomy, and it doesn't move as smoothly in space, and it doesn't have the rounded, soft forms that we would come to expect when we get to the Renaissance of creations that are totally based on naturalism. Regardless, it's a pretty good wolf. Okay, say goodbye to Mama Wolf.